Site 360, Section 44, Drug Use and Abuse. I am Bruce Bradway. I am a doctor. I do have a PhD in psychology. This is the fall 2023 semester. And this is where I live, Lost Nation, Iowa. You can look it up if you like. If you've ever seen the movie Field of Dreams, we are just about 30 miles south of Dyersville, where Field of Dreams is. I guess they're going to have a baseball game there next year. I can't remember who's playing. This is my telephone number. It's my cell phone number. I do have office hours Monday through Tuesday. I have Zoom office hours. Monday and Tuesday, it's in the afternoon, 3 to 5. And Wednesday and Thursday, it's in the morning, 8 to 10, Mountain Time, your time. And here's the number right here, 989-0050-4545. And that is my number. It's been my Zoom number for a couple of years now. And I will keep it until they make me stop. Here's my email address. It's a Dene College email address, of course. Okay, what else do we need to know? This is the textbook that we use, Uppers, Downers, and All-Arounders. Physical and Mental Effects of Psychoactive Drugs, 8th edition. If you have the 7th edition or the 9th edition, I don't know if there's a 10th edition, then that's fine. They're pretty much the same. The authors are Anaba actually the pharmacist that wrote the text, and Cohen is the one that is a ghostwriter, is a person that put the words together so they made a lot of sense. He's the Chat GPT guy that made everything look good. Okay, so there's only 10 chapters in the book. No, that's not right. There's only 9 chapters in the book. Or maybe I left the last chapter off. But what I've done, and we're going to talk about all the major types of drugs, opioids, uppers, downers, all-arounders, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana. We're going to talk about all the major drugs, LSD. We're going to talk about treatment. We're also going to talk about prevention. And the last chapter is one that I made up myself. And the reason I did it is because we talk a lot about illicit drugs, illegal drugs, and that's what the article is primarily about. But we don't talk about any pharmaceuticals. And in the last chapter, or the last week in chapter 15, or week 15, I'll be talking about psychotropic medications, or medications that you use to combat depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. So we will talk about the pharmaceuticals that potentially you will come in contact with if you do become a psychologist and work in counseling. Okay, so how do you pass the class? Well, there's 10 chapter tests, and each test has 20 questions, and that adds up to 200 points. Then there is a library paper. You can write it about any drug you want. You can talk about marijuana, LSD, the opioid crisis, hydrocodone, OxyContin. You can talk about speed. You can talk about methamphetamines. You can talk about a pharmaceutical, Zoloft or Xanax, Risperidone. It really doesn't matter. You can talk about the date rape drugs, GHB, Rohypnol. Ketamine has been used as a date rape drug. You can talk about any drugs. And you can increase my knowledge level of that drug. With each chapter, I want you to write an article to critique. When we're talking about the uppers, downers, and all-arounders, it would be nice if you talked about uppers, downers, and all-arounders. A lot of research out there. There's a difference between research, and I want you to look at a research article some people have a difficult time telling the difference between a research article and an information article. A research article always has subjects. It always will tell you how many people were in the research, and that's a good way to determine that. Usually, it's in the abstract, so you can read through there, and it will tell you, well, we had 497 people that we injected with methamphetamine to see what their reaction would be. This is, of course, we're not going to do that, but that's what I'm talking about. So it all adds up to about 400 points, and that's how you pass the class. You write your paper, you do your 10 article critiques, and you take your quizzes at the end of each chapter, and that's it. That's how you do it. Okay, about the library paper. The library paper needs to be 5 pages of text. A page has 150, or has 115. A page has 23 lines, between 20 and 23 lines. Normally, if you're using the font you're supposed to use, which is New Times Roman, is what you're supposed to use. You'll have 20 to 23 lines, and that adds up to 115 lines. If you have 5 pages of 23 lines, that should be 115 lines. So what I'll do is and I do this, I count every paper unless it's obvious that they have more than 5 pages. If you only have 21 lines in your pages or 20 lines, then you're going to need an extra page, okay? So it needs 6 pages of text. And when I say text, it doesn't include the reference page, and it doesn't include the introduction page. Everything is due on the papers will not be as, oh, well, let's take that part out. Let's take that part out. I will accept papers up until the last day. And the last day, I think, is I have to turn in grades on the 11th of December. They are due on the 3rd of November, but I do not count off for late work. Crises happen all the time. I understand all this, and I'll let somebody else teach you time management. It's not in my wheelhouse, as it were. Okay, so what else do we need to know? I just want to hear your words. I don't really need to hear what somebody else is saying. I don't need to hear what the robot in Silicon Valley is talking about. I don't really care to hear what he has to say, or she, or it, or whatever we're talking about. So when we are talking about artificial intelligence, or LLS, or ChatGPT, I consider it cheating to use ChatGPT. I know a lot of professors are saying, let's embrace the new technology. But my fear is that you will not learn how to write, that you'll not learn that certain verbs use certain prepositions. Some prepositions don't fit with certain verbs. And the only way that you can figure this out is by reading and by writing, and that's what I want you to do. I want you to write yourself. I don't really need to know what some AI robot in Silicon Valley thinks about the Navajo Nation. It probably isn't very positive. The first time I came in contact with a ChatGPT paper was telling me that American Indians need to assimilate because they want to be like white people. I know. I was shocked. I was really surprised that this kid had that, or this student had that idea in his mind, and evidently he hadn't read through through the paper, and he missed that part. And I don't know if he would have gotten it anyway. He would have figured it out. Anyway, so the reality is, ChatGPT is not an artificial intelligence. that was developed on the Navajo Nation. So they're not going to have the ideas that you guys have, and that's what I'm looking for. Besides, this is not a good idea. It's not a good idea to cheat. And I have a feeling that if we are not careful, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen if we keep going down this road where we don't have to do anything, we don't have to think, we don't have to create anything. We'll let the robots create everything, and this is what potentially is going to happen. I think if I can get there, let me get rid of this. Save. Here we go.
I have it all morning, so let's hover over to the driving range and hit a few virtual balls in space.
Nah, we did that yesterday. I don't want to do that.
Well, then what do you want to do?
I don't know. Something.
Make a place scream.
It doesn't sound
Look, I'm tired of
So
it.
what's happening?
Same over and over.
If you can't fold the straws,
No,
the episode isn't any good.
Hot. Over here.
Hello? Tunnel. I'm in a tunnel. I can't hear you.
There you are.
By and large, everything you need to be happy. Your day is very important to us.
Hey, drink much. Here, take the cup. Hey, take the cup.
Please remain stationary. A service bot will be here to assist you momentarily.
Stewards? Hello?
Please remain stationary. A service bot will be here to assist you momentarily.
What's that? What's going on? John? No. John. Hi, Wally.
A is for Axiom, your home sweet home. B is for by and large, your very best friend.
Time for lunch. In a cup. Feel beautiful.
Stunning. Great.
I know, honey. Men.
Attention, Axiom shoppers. Try blue. It's the new red.
Ooh.
Dates? Oh, don't get me started on the date. Every holiday I have been on has been a virtual disaster. If one who wasn't so superficial, there are men out there. Well, I know because I've spoken a bit of what the? Huh? Wow. Mary? Huh? Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Hey.
I didn't know we had a pool.
Blue, it's the new red. Okay, that's what's going to happen to humanity if we stop thinking. Anyway, all right. Let's go ahead and get started. This is quite a long chapter, so here we go. Pharmacology of addiction. That's what we're talking about today. If I can figure out where I am. There we go. Okay. At present, there is a debate going on over the legalization of marijuana. I think there's, 20 states, 30 states now. Arizona and New Mexico have legalized marijuana, recreational marijuana, along with medical marijuana. and I live in a state, this is weird. I live in a state where marijuana is completely illegal. You can't use medical marijuana and you can't use recreational marijuana. This is one of 4 states that is the case. Currently, the drug that seems to be causing the most serious problems is crystal methamphetamine and opiates and opioids, prescription opiates and opioids. Not only are we having trouble with these drugs in North America, but it's causing a crisis in Europe and in Asia as well. This is methamphetamine. This is a lady about 5 years later. That's what she looked like. That's what she looked like before. Actually, I think I know. No. This is what the lady looked like. Not bad looking, and that's what happened to her. And it accelerates your life. There you go. I have an idea. The most serious problem in the United States at present seems to be the use of prescription drugs. This is especially a problem with teens who seem to be getting into their parents' and their grandparents' pill bottles and stealing them. The biggest killer among all the addictions is smoking of tobacco. States are increasing the limits to public smoking. This is what lungs look like on tobacco. This is what they look like when they're clean. I can remember my first autopsy. The guy died of cancer, and he was a smoker. We took out his lungs, and I'll tell you, and they were almost completely black. It was really not pleasant. And the smell. The use of performance-enhancing drugs in sports has been an issue since the home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa in 1999. It is accepted that steroids can cause damage, but new generations of performance enhancers have hit the sports scene that do questionable damage and are undetectable through drug testing. And of course, the question is, what price glory? Mark McGwire, of course, is a hitting coach for the St. Louis Cardinals. There has been an immense growth of computer games, cell phone usage, and other online problems, such as pornography. With the increase of technology, psychologists have been behind the addiction power curve and identifying problems that people are having. And what was I teaching? I was teaching another class. My cinema therapy and social media class. The DSM-5, which is actually the DSM-5 TR and the ICD-11, neither of them have any type of telephone or social media or gaming addictions in them. Neither one of them do. Early man saw his world as mysterious and dangerous, and they had a basic need to cope with his environment. Early man discovered that by ingesting certain plants, they could ease their fear and anxiety, reduce pain, treat some illnesses, give them pleasure, and assist them to talk with their gods. And who can argue with that? The human brain responds to psychoactive substances. When people suffer from mental illnesses or behavioral addictions, the altered state of consciousness makes the individual feel better. Psychoactive substances make the individual feel better, otherwise they wouldn't use them voluntarily. Governments, ruling classes, and religious entities have sought to control the supply of drugs through growing, manufacturing, distribution, taxing, and prohibition. So, if you want a liquor license in the city of Ballard, you have to go and get this stamp right here. And then you have to display that liquor license in your establishment. Ancient Sumerian medicine men used opium as a secret medicine. The secrets. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt would dole out beer to keep their laborers building pyramids. Coca leaves were controlled and doled out by the Incan rulers in Peru to maintain the needed laborers in the country that they were controlling. After the Spanish conquered the Inca, they controlled the growing of coca leaves to increase tax revenues. If it's something everybody wants, then you should sell it. Don't ever give it away. The American revolutionaries exported and taxed whiskey and tobacco to help finance the Revolutionary War. Technology allowed additive substances to change, improve, and strengthen potencies over the centuries. We're always looking to change things and make it better. Alcohol was first distilled to heighten the potency in Arabia in the 10th century. And that's what it looks like. They boiled it. And then it condensed, and then we had distilled alcohol. Morphine was first refined from opium in Germany in 1804. Cocaine was first refined from coca leaves in Germany in 1859. Those Germans, way to go, chemists. An automatic cigarette rolling machine was invented in the United States in 1881. Before that, everybody either chewed tobacco. They could roll their own cigarettes, but that wasn't very common. Most people either smoked, smoked cigars or chewed tobacco. But then they invented the rolling machine. Now, one of the great things about the rolling machine is you don't need nearly as much tobacco for a cigarette as you do for a cigar. And they could put in stronger types of tobacco and get you using more and more of it, and charge you more and more for less and less. A cigar has so much tobacco in it. You can buy a cigar for 10 cents. Back then you could buy a pack of 20 cigarettes for 20 cents or a quarter. The stimulant amphetamine was first synthesized in Germany in 1887 to replace ephedra. It was synthesized in Japan in 1919. LSD was first synthesized in Switzerland in 1938, and this is Dr. Hoffman. He's the one that did it. That's the guy that found LSD. We'll talk about that later. Sinsemilla growing techniques were first used in the United States to increase the THC level of marijuana in the 1960s. THC content of marijuana is 14 times stronger today than it was in the 1970s. So your grandfather, when he talks about, dude, I used to smoke pot all the time, and you can tell him, Grandpa, the pot you smoked had hardly any THC in it. Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. The stuff you smoked was like smoking grass or weeds. Oh, wait a minute. That's what they call pot, isn't it? The amphetamine molecule was first modified to produce designer drugs such as MDMA in the United States in 1910. Okay, we invented the cigarette rolling machine and MDMA. Good for us. The Germans are way ahead of us, though, I think. What do they have? Opium and morphine and heroin and amphetamines. Oh, they're way ahead. Faster and more efficient methods of putting drugs into the body has intensified the effects. Oh, street kids. 4000 BC, Sumerians mixed opium with alcohol to produce a stronger effect. Way to go, Sumerians. It was discovered that the absorptive effects of coca leaves could be intensified if the leaf was mixed with charred oyster shells in Peru in 1450. Now this is 1450, that's 40 years before, no, it's almost 50 years before Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Well, 42 years. In England in 1800, aficionados discovered that they felt giddy and high from inhaling nitrous oxide. All right. In 1900, Europeans discovered that if you snorted cocaine, they would absorb the drug more quickly. Can't argue with that. In the United States, users discovered that they could intensify the high of crack cocaine by smoking the rocks in the 1970s. And I remember when this happened. I was working in medicine in the emergency room. Oh, what a mess. Let's smoke it. Within the last decade, users have discovered that they could get a bigger rush from select time-release pain relievers such as OxyContin and hydrocodone by crushing the tablets and injecting them directly into the bloodstream. Over 4,000 plants have been identified as yielding psychoactive substances. 60 of these have been in continuous use somewhere in the world throughout history. Opium poppies, marijuana tops, coca leaves, tea leaves, betel nuts, cot leaves, coffee beans, tobacco leaves, fruits and other plants that can be used to manufacture alcohol. There's evidence that select groups of Neanderthal in Europe used fly agaric mushrooms to produce hallucinogenic effects for shamanistic rituals. Look at those noses. Wow. Many of the first cultures considered alcoholic beverages, especially wine, as a gift from the gods. The Egyptians had Osiris, who was the goddess of wine. The Greeks had Dionysus, who was the god of wine, and the Romans had Bacchus. You probably have heard these names. What they're talking about are the gods of wine. The Bible has 150 references to alcohol. Most of them are warnings against its use because people can become addicted. Opium has been cultivated in the civilized world for over 6,000 years. In ancient Egypt, 5,000 years ago, opium was used to treat mental illness and to quiet crying babies. Drug them up, dude. Cannabis sativa has been grown as hemp for thousands of years. The plant has been used mainly for its fiber in manufacturing rope, but also for its medicinal and hallucinogenic properties. Mescal beans, peyote cacti, and psychedelic mushrooms have been used for their hallucinogenic properties for thousands of years. These are mescal beans, by the way. Mostly used by shamans for visions, these drugs have been used in both North and South America. The psilocybin mushroom was preferred by the Aztecs and the Mayan culture. Of the 30,000 species of mushrooms in North and South America, only 80 produce hallucinogens psilocybin and psilocin. And if you think you got to be really careful because mushrooms, some of them are poisonous and they will kill you quick. Tobacco cultivation and use dates back 7,000 years in North America. Looking at the substance from a survival point of view, its strong alkaloid properties not only made it noxious to herbivores, but gave it the properties that humans seek. And it is these alkaloid properties that makes it so destructive. Whoops. Archaeological evidence from South America shows that coca leaves have been prized by the indigenous people there for at least 5,000 years. Evidence seems to indicate that they gave it to the dying to ease their journey into the afterlife. Other drugs used by the ancients included members of the nightshade family, Silicincaea, which contains the chemicals atropine and scopolamine. During the Dark Ages, people who used these drugs were accused of witchcraft, the medicinal qualities being ascribed to demonic possession or collusion. And one of the things that they said the witches did, they would take the wooden shafts of these plants and they would make brooms out of them, and then they'd fly around on the brooms. Now, why was this such a big deal? Well, they weren't wearing underwear, and so what was happening? The atropine and scopolamine were getting into their nether regions as they were sitting on the broomsticks, and they were getting all drugged up just by riding around on their broomsticks. No wonder they have big smiles on their faces. Anyway, there you go. I was shocked when I heard that. A botanist told me that story. I was going, really? Wow, okay. Well, what strange things to do. Datura, also known as thorn apple, is sometimes made into a salve and absorbed through the skin. I just cut some of this down in my yard. I've got it in my yard. And I remember seeing it when I was down in Salih. So this stuff grows all over the place. Henbane has been used as far back as ancient Egypt, about 3,500 years ago. It was used as a painkiller and as a poison. In ceremonies, it was used to induce insanity, which in turn produced hallucinations and resulted in prophecies. Belladonna. Belladonna is Italian for beautiful woman. It is also known as witch's berry and a devil's herb. This drug dilates the pupils, inebriates the user, and can cause hallucinations and delirium. You may know this plant as the amaryllis, and there you go. That's what belladonna is. So if you've got a amaryllis plant in your house, you have a potential hallucinogen and delirium in your house. The mandrake is also known as mandragora. The root of the plant often grows in the shape of a man and was used in ancient Greece to make prophecies. The drug causes hallucinations and delirium. In 15th century Italy, it was used as an aphrodisiac. One of the stranger psychoactive drugs is ergot, a brownish purple fungus that causes cereal grain rust, especially on rye, but also on wheat, barley, and triticale. You probably have never heard of triticale. Triticale was real popular in the United States in the 1970s. And the reason is because it has a larger seed. So while wheat has a seed that's about maybe half an inch to an inch long, triticale is an inch to 2 inches long. So they were thinking, well, if people like the taste of triticale, we can get farmers to grow triticale instead of wheat. Well, triticale had no problem growing. It was a nice plant. It had a nuttier flavor than wheat, and for that reason, people didn't like it as much, and so it's not that popular. Or it's grown overseas, but I don't think it's grown in the United States anymore. I was living in Lubbock, Texas at the time when they had this push for triticale. Everybody was, they were worried about people starving to death around the world. And they were trying to figure out how to increase the yield. And boy, that would sure increase the yield, but nobody wanted to eat it. That was the problem. You could find triticale bread in stores, but not anymore. Not as far as I can remember. Then they started mixing wheat flour with triticale flour, and people didn't like it because they were still calling it bread, but it was triticale bread. Anyway, let's not worry about it. The active ingredient in ergot that causes the problems is lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. Outbreaks of ergot in Europe and rye-growing areas have caused widespread insanity and death. One outbreak in France in 944 is reputed to have killed 40,000 people. Now, if you're wondering who makes rye, who grows rye, well, in Europe they grow a lot of rye bread, or they bake a lot of rye bread. So if you go, especially if you go to Germany, the Germans are big on grains, and it's cold up there. And the rye grows a little bit faster than wheat does and barley does. So there you go. That's why their bread is brown. They have a lot of brown breads. The first written use of caffeine came with the Olmecs 3,500 years ago, who used coca, or that's what they make chocolate out of, to produce a stimulating but bitter drink. I don't know if you've ever eaten raw chocolate, unsugared chocolate, but it's pretty bitter. Tea was cultivated 1,700 years ago in China and has been used in Eastern Asia ever since. For some reason, my aunt used to buy unseasoned or unsugared chocolate, and of course we were thinking, oh man, I just love chocolate. We'll steal a chunk of her chocolate. That was a huge mistake. Pretty nasty tasting stuff. Coffee was first cultivated about 1,200 years ago in Arabia. The Bradways, this is really kind of weird, but the Bradways in Indiana were candy makers, and so she used to make candy from her own recipes. Her favorites, she was really good at making mint flavored insides with a chocolate covering, and the chocolate covering wasn't sweet, it was the inside that was sweet. So the chocolate was supposed to give you It was a balance. The other was chocolate-covered cherries, but the chocolate's not sweet. It's not milk chocolate. It was this bitter chocolate that she used to use. And it was good. She made really good chocolate. It was my aunt. And there's another branch of the Bradway family, and they're all called candy makers. They make all kinds of candy, but they put a lot of sugar in everything now. In the old days, not so much. The invasion of the Americas by the Europeans opened up new markets for psychoactive substances. As the European and American people traded their addictive substances back and forth, Europeans alcohol, the Native Americans tobacco, and there you go. So let's trade our negative stuff back and forth. We got cocaine in the Americas. Let's give you something else for it. Coffee, alcohol, and tea were brought to the Americas, and cocoa and tobacco was taken back to Europe. Ritualized use of stimulants became part of each culture. Opium came back to Europe in the form of a medication known as Theriac, which saw opium mixed with from 70 to 100 other medications. Eventually, in the 16th century, a stronger version of opium began to be used as a tincture of opium became quite popular. It's a substance known as tincture. Tincture means it's mixed with alcohol. So if you have tincture of this or tincture of that, it's alcohol mixed with whatever it is. So tincture of opium is also known as laudanum. It was used for everything from a sleep inducer to a painkiller to a treatment for alcoholism. So if you're watching an old movie or you're watching a movie about the Old West, especially Wyatt Earp's girlfriend before he ran off with the Jewish actress, his girlfriend was hooked on laudanum. So anytime you hear laudanum, it's one of those words that if you hear it in a movie, you just kind of pass right over it. You're going, oh, it must be another type of whiskey. And in reality, it's a lot stronger than whiskey. In the early 1600s, a new drink was invented in Holland. It was gin. Because of the contamination of the water supply of Europe, they used their rivers as sewers, and they have used their rivers as sewers for thousands of years. Only alcoholic beverages could be drunk with impunity. Either that, or you had to be really close to the mountains, the Alps. So if you wanted a drink of water, you'd had to, hike up to the Alps and get some water from some of the melting glaciers, because the rivers are all contaminated. This new drink was flavorful, easy to make, and inexpensive. It became a drink of choice among the poor in England, unfortunately. Quickly, alcoholism rates and mortality due to drinking skyrocketed in the back alleys of London. England's growing population stopped growing due to the deaths. Attempts to regulate gin production and distribution led to riots. Production rates septupled. Septupled means it was multiplied by 7. So if you're making 1 million barrels of gin a year, if it septuples, now all of a sudden you're making 7 million barrels of gin a year. Finally, in 1751, new laws were passed and gin consumption returned to a less deadly level. It was just too expensive. And here you go, this drunk lady's got sores on her legs. She just lets her baby drop down into and bust its head open. This is such a cool picture. Buildings are falling down. This guy's a coffin maker because so many people are dying. There's a dead body right here, theoretically. You can see this man's wasting away to nothing. He's got sores on his legs too. Cool. Still, control of the psychoactive drug use was sporadic throughout the world. Nitrous oxide, or also known as laughing gas, inhaling parties were not uncommon in Victorian England, though the practice sometimes resulted in more fighting than laughing, because they were inebriated. Morphine was about 10 times as potent as opium. Morphine was used during the Crimean and Civil Wars to treat wounded casualties. Many men became addicted to the painkiller after these wars. And we all know where Crimea is now because we've all been watching the war in Ukraine. It's a peninsula that comes off of the landmass of Ukraine. It was given to the Ukrainians by Stalin. Stalin gave Crimea to the Ukrainians. At that time, of course, the Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And now Putin has decided to take it back. Opium became dangerous to life and limb with the development of morphine, but it would get worse. In 1955, the hypodermic needle was invented, making it possible to inject morphine. In 1874, morphine was synthesized into diacetyl morphine, or heroin. Heroin was 2 and sometimes 5 times stronger than morphine. And who did it? Those Germans did it. They're the ones. Bear drugs. Opium became involved in one of the oddest events in the history of psychoactive substances. The British were addicted to the caffeine in tea, but the Chinese demanded silver bullion to buy it. And that means that it has to be in a silver. You can't say, well, this piece of paper is worth this much silver bullion. That's not the way it works. You had to pay them in hard currency. The British had no commodity that the Chinese wanted, that the Chinese would buy with silver. The Chinese had eradicated opium smoking from their country in around 1000, which means 800 years ago they got rid of opium. In 1839, the British battled the Chinese to open their ports to the opium trade. The Chinese lost the war in 1842, and they had to open their ports to opium trade. A second opium war was fought from 1856 to 1860 to open more Chinese markets for trade. The Chinese lost again. Trade went from 15 tons in 1800 to 2.5 million tons by the turn of the 20th century. The British had cheap tea, and the Chinese had an addiction. Now, this is a really serious problem because if you look at how much the difference between 15 tons and 2.5 million tons, that's an awful lot of opium. What else was I going to say? Something horrible. Oh, the Brits. So if you look at the wealthy people of England, a lot of them became wealthy because of the opium trade. They also became wealthy because of the slave trade. Before the English did away with the slave trade in the 1820s or 1830s. So, a lot of these famous English names, this family that became part of the hierarchy, the royal families, a lot of these became wealthy because of slaves and opium, as ugly as that is. 1859, cocaine was synthesized from the coca leaf. It quickly became a new medicine. It was used as a topical anesthetic and used for eye surgery. It was mixed with wine to make a new, stronger concoction. It was used by Freud to control asthma, gastric problems as an aphrodisiac, and to relieve depression. And you have to remember, Freud was not a psychologist. He was a psychologist, but he was a physician before he was a psychologist. During the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, many patented medicines were manufactured with what would become illegal drugs. Coca-Cola was first manufactured with 5 milligrams of cocaine and continues to contain coca extract from the cocaine removed. Coca-Cola continues to be the largest purchaser of Trujillo coca leaf. And I've always thought that Coke tasted just a little bit different than other colas. And I was right. But I thought it was something else. I thought they were putting something else in there. But it turns out that it really is cocaine. It's the cocaine extract, which is the flavoring. That's why Coke doesn't taste the same as Pepsi. That's why Coke doesn't taste the same as RC Cola or any other cola that you could possibly buy. But all was not paradise in the alcohol-soaked United States, and it was an alcohol-soaked United States. Drunk and high men made poor workers and really bad husbands. Inebriation impeded responsibility, and abuse among drinkers was common. The first temperance organization was started in the United States in 1826. To understand why temperance was so widely accepted in the United States, we have to understand that the woman's lot in the early 19th century. Contraception was illegal in the United States. Let me repeat that. Contraception of any kind was illegal in the United States. Why? Because they wanted more people. Why did they want more people? They wanted more people so that they could fill up all this vast land that they had. They also needed workers for their factories. So yeah, let's make the women have babies every year. That'll work. Women tended to be pregnant almost constantly, and that's mainly because contraception was illegal. The drinking pattern in the United States followed the path of cheapest booze. Corn liquor was least expensive, so men tended to drink voluminous amounts of whiskey. Corn whiskey. Why corn whiskey? Because it was too expensive to transport your corn as a whole product. But you could synthesize it, and you could make it into whiskey. And it was a lot cheaper to transport it as corn whiskey than it was to transport it as just the corn grain or corn on the cob. It's too expensive. So let's send it all out as corn whiskey. Women saddled with a sporting husband were likely to raise their children in poverty and have to accept his drunken abuse. Sporting means that he went to the bars and he drank. He was a sport. U.S. consumption of alcohol in 1830 was 7.1 gallons of pure ethanol for each citizen compared to 1.8 gallons today. 7.1 gallons of pure ethanol. So how much alcohol is there in whiskey? Whiskey is about half, usually a little bit less than that. Half of it is pure alcohol. So if you're drinking a fifth of whiskey, and it takes 5 of those bottles, 5/5 equals a gallon. So that's 5 of those times 7 is 35 fifths of whiskey. 35. Well, how many fifths of whiskey could you drink in a year? That's 2, 3. That's 3 a month. That's 3 bottles of whiskey a month. Oh man, that's a lot of booze. But, you know, if you're a drinker, and this was the average, so there were men that were drinking a lot more than that. The first state to prohibit the sale of alcohol was Maine in 1851. By 1855, 1/3 of the states in the United States had laws controlling the sale and the use of alcohol. By 1855. By 1920, enough states, 33 out of 48, limited the use of alcohol to lead the passage of the Volstead Act, prohibiting the manufacture or the sale of alcohol. This was in 1920. They prohibited the manufacture or the sale of alcohol for anything except private use. So you could make your own beer, but you couldn't sell it to anybody. You could only drink it yourself. You could make your own wine, but you couldn't sell it to anybody. You had to drink it yourself. But alcohol wasn't the first psychoactive substance regulated. In 1909, the Opium Exclusion Act was passed, banning the importation of opium into the United States for use other than medicine. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotic Act was passed, labeling opium as a narcotic to be controlled by the federal government. While the Volstead Act was repealed in 1933, that's when they started drinking again. From 1920 to 1933 is only 13 years. Other psychoactive substances have been added to the list of controlled substances in the United States. 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, banning the use and cultivation of cannabis. In 1965, drug abuse control amendments controlled the manufacture of stimulants and depressants. In 1970, the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act consolidated all the drug legislation so that they would be controlled out of the same office. In 1984, the legal drinking age was raised to 21. Before that, some states had legal drinking ages of 18. Most of your western states had legal drinking ages of 18. Louisiana had a legal drinking age of 18. Wisconsin had a legal drinking age of 18, as did Ohio. Did the Volstead Act work? That's a question a lot of people are asking. The answer really all depends on who is answering it. Good things that transpired from prohibition. Cirrhosis of the liver and other alcohol-related diseases declined dramatically because people couldn't drink as much. Domestically, violence fell. Violent crime actually fell by 2/3. Public drunkenness disappeared because if you were drunk in public, then you got arrested for public drunkenness. And you were drunk. Where did you get your alcohol? That was usually the question. Anyway, so this is all good stuff. Violent crime dropped by 2/3. Domestic violence, so the women weren't getting beat up so much. Public drunkenness disappeared. You can't argue with that. People weren't dying of cirrhosis of the liver like they were before. I mean, think about it. If you're drinking 7 gallons of pure alcohol a year, what does that do to your liver? What negative things transpired that were directly related to the Volstead Act? There was an increase of organized crime, and it had to do with transport, bootlegging liquor. Corruption of politicians, corruption of law enforcement personnel. Drinking eventually returned to pre-prohibition levels, but it took 20 years. And since the population had markedly increased, the amount of alcohol consumed was actually lower per person. Remember, it was 7.1. The average in the United States was 7.1 per person. That includes all the kids. So some of these guys were drinking lots and lots of liquor. Now it's only 1.8 gallons of pure alcohol a year. So it's gone down an amazing amount. So all of these things, increased organized crime, corruption of politicians, corruption of law enforcement personnel, where was all this taking place? Well, most of it was taking place in the urban areas. In Chicago, in New York, in Detroit, in Baltimore. That's where all of these problems were. So what was happening in the rest of the United States? Well, the rest of the United States, nothing was happening. The rural areas, not nearly as bad as the urban areas. What's wrong with pot? Hemp was grown in the Americas with little problem until it first began to be smoked as a mild hallucinogen in Texas in 1910, from whence it spread to the rest of the West. Especially, it went west. It went west to California. In the 1930s, the Hearst newspapers ran a propaganda campaign to label marijuana as a narcotic. Now, one of the interesting things that we're talking about marijuana, but you didn't see any marijuana any place except west of Texas. East of Texas, nobody grew it. It wasn't there. It was not even part of anybody's mindset. But, of course, Hearst decided it was the Mexicans that were bringing this stuff across the border, so he wanted to stop the illegal immigration or the legal immigration of Mexicans because they were bringing all that stuff into the United States. What he really wanted to do was control the population in the United States. He thought too many people that weren't like him were coming into the United States. By 1936, 38 states had branded marijuana as one of the most dangerous drugs. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, banning the growth of marijuana in the United States. Marijuana was used as a drug only in rural areas where it grew wild and in the back rooms of cities where it was identified with jazz musicians and beat poets. And of course, you're not going to think, I think I'll take this plant and try to smoke it. Oh, wait a minute, it just tastes like weeds. This is nasty. I mean, who even thinks like that? Today I pulled about 5 marijuana plants out of the fence row in the corner of my property. Stink. That stuff really smells bad. Anyway. But it's marijuana. So what does that mean? Well, it's probably hemp. What they call in this area ditchweed, because it grows wild. When they were during World War II, they legalized the use of hemp because they needed rope for the war effort. So they transported the marijuana plants, the hemp plants, on the railroads, and so as they were jiggling, all the seeds were bouncing out of the cars, and they got into the ditches, and then from the railroad ditches, it got into the road ditches. That's where the ditchweed came from. But it's all hemp, so don't get excited that I've got all these marijuana plants growing in my fence row. Oh, this is the beat generation. These are beat poets. That's Allen Ginsberg right there, and that's Burroughs. That's who that is. And this is Jack Kerouac, if I'm not mistaken. And I should know who this guy is, but I don't. Anyway. In the 1950s and 1960s, the influence of the beat poets' support of using psychoactive substances, including marijuana, as an act of rebellion, caught on with the youth of that era. With the beginning of the Vietnam War, the anti-war movement became intermingled with youthful rebellion, which by this time was connected to marijuana usage. Amphetamines were first synthesized in 1887 in Germany. Over the years, the substance was used as an inhaler under the name Benzedrine and as an appetite suppressant. During World War II, amphetamines were used to combat fatigue by both sides, by all sides. The Japanese used it, the Germans used it, and as did the Americans and the Brits and the Canadians. In the 1950s and 1960s, amphetamines were used in diet pills. By 1970, it was estimated that 6 to 8% of Americans were using diet pills. Amphetamines were part of the fuel of the hippie movements and the Summer of Love in 1967. And 1967 was the year I graduated from high school. Of course, I'm from rural Indiana, so none of this had anything to do with anything that I had to do with. Congress passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act in 1970, and these are ladies having flowers painted on their breasts for some reason. Not exactly sure what's going on. I like her sunglasses though. Anyway, natural diet pills. Sports were pretty much the purview of the wealthy and the extremely gifted through the first half of the 20th century. Wasn't important enough to try to cheat or to gain an advantage. With the Cold War after World War II, every field where the free world met the communist world became a battlefield of sorts. The world of sports, and especially the Olympics, became a very contentious area of conflict. And I'm showing you two different pictures. This is a weightlifter from the 1990s. This is Johnny Weissmuller. So if you've ever watched a Tarzan movie, that's Tarzan right there. He's the guy that played Tarzan. He was an Olympic champion. Now, he wasn't one of the rich and famous before. He was just a really gifted swimmer. And because of that, he got an acting contract. Or he went into the Olympics, he won gold medals. And after that, of course, they won it. And because he was not that ugly, they decided to make him Tarzan because he could swim. And he was muscular. You can see he's muscular. Not this kind of muscular, but he was muscular enough, I guess. Eastern Bloc countries, led by the examples of East Germany, began giving their athletes anabolic steroids, creating super athletes. The world was appalled by the results and came out against the practice in 1968. Since then, all amateur athletic organizations have banned the use of steroids, along with the professional athletic organizations around the world. This is a lady, shot putter, and this is what she looks like today. She's a he now, because they gave her so much anabolic steroids it really messed her up. She's East German, the blue and the white. Anyway, he set a world record. Wait a minute. She set a world record. And now he complains. He's got all kinds of interesting cancers from all the anabolic steroids he took. He may have died. I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember his name. But he was in a documentary about East German anabolic steroid use. Sedatives have been used since the beginning of the 20th century in the form of bromides, chloral hydrate, and paraldehyde. Barbitol was marketed as Veronal in 1903. Phenobarbital was developed in 1913. Sedatives became very popular during the Depression and World War II eras, peaking at this time period with over 50 different barbiturates dominating the market. In the 1950s, doctors realized they had only overprescribed the drugs, but they had created not only had they done that, but they had created a whole generation of addicted adults. And this is, if you've ever listened to the Rolling Stones' Mama's Little Helper, that's what they're talking about. All these people that were addicted to these antidepressants. They weren't really antidepressants, they were sedatives to knock them out. Why were they? They were depressed. They were anxious because during the Depression and World War II. They did the same thing during the Vietnam era. The wives of the men that were overseas were all scared that their husbands would die. So the military just juiced them up with Librium and Valium. And we'll talk about that later. I didn't work in the pharmacy, but I certainly saw all the Valium and Librium that they were dispensing. They came in big 5-gallon buckets. Everything else came in 1-gallon containers, but not Valium and Librium. They were handing them out by the scoopful. In the 1950s and 1960s, a whole group of mild tranquilizers were developed to replace the more dangerous tranquilizers. Miltown and the benzodiazepines such as Librium, Valium, Xanax, Klonopin, and Halcyon became the most widely used drugs in the world. Ergot, barley rust, had created havoc wherever it appeared, and no one knew why until Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann isolated. We just saw this guy as an older man. Isolated the active ingredient lysergic acid diethylamide from the fungus. After his discovery, Hofmann accidentally dosed himself and discovered the psychedelic effects of the substance. Well, guess who found out? The U.S. Army and the CIA bought the rights to LSD from Hofmann and experimented with the drug through the 1950s and into the 1960s. MK Ultra is what they called that program. One of the researchers working with the CIA was Dr. Timothy Leary of Harvard, who decided that the psychedelic substance needed to be shared with the world. And now we got LSD all over the place. 1.5 billion drunk people drink alcohol around the world, and there's one guy, and he's either counting or he sure is a happy fella. He's already had 2 bottles of wine, and look how red his face is. What a lucky guy. 76 million of these people have an alcohol abuse disorder. 180 million people worldwide abuse illicit drugs. 160 million people worldwide smoke marijuana each year. That is what they refer to as a blunt. It has been estimated that 20 to 60% of all hospital beds are inhabited due to drug abuse. And this, of course, I worked in medicine for 30 years. This is the most irritating thing about working in medicine, was that these people their medical problems had to do with their drinking or their drugging or whatever they were doing. And they would never tell you how many, somebody come in drunk as a skunk, and you'd say, well, how much did you drink? And they would say, just had a couple beers. Just a couple beers. They always just had a couple beers. Just had a couple. How many is a couple? 25? Illicit drugs figure into the economic structures both where they are grown and where they are used. Heroin, cocaine, marijuana, MDMA, also known as ecstasy, and methamphetamine. Illegal heroin is grown in 4 areas of the world. The Golden Crescent is an area in Southwest Asia that encompasses areas of Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan. And it's right here. And it goes up to here. My brother was there during the Afghan War, and he was controlling a select area. And I think it was down here, down in this area. And that was his most serious problem, was the heroin, or the opium being grown. The Golden Triangle encompasses parts of Southeast Asia, countries of Thailand, Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, and Laos. And this is the Golden Triangle right here. So we've got, on the other side of India, we've got Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And on the other side of India, we've got Laos, Myanmar, and Thailand. And China. It's actually China's part of this too. Mexico exports a form of heroin that is dark in color and called black tar or brown heroin. It's not quite as strong as white heroin, but it's there anyway. So Mexico. Colombia not only exports cocaine to the United States, but a white heroin as well. White heroin found in the Golden Triangle, Golden Crescent, and Colombia is a pure, stronger heroin. So it's grown in Colombia, it's grown in the Golden Triangle, it's grown in the Golden Crescent, and it's grown in Mexico. 90% of the world's supply of illicit heroin comes from poppy fields of Afghanistan. Now, you would have thought that we would do something about that. 60% of Afghanistan's wealth comes from opium sales, and the United States' efforts to curb the production has resulted in an increase by 50%. So it didn't work. But my brother was able to get them to slow down their production when he was in Afghanistan in 2005. The nationalist Chinese under Chiang Kai-shek and his Kuomintang party dealt with the drug tongs of Shanghai while they controlled China. After the Kuomintang were expelled from China in 1948, the communists kicked them out, communist Chinese kicked them out. They continued to grow and market opium through the Thai-Burma border in order to buy weapons for their defense against the communists. That was their excuse. So they continued in the drug trade. This political party of the nationalist Chinese. This is Chiang Kai-shek right here. The Vietnam War was a quagmire. Not only was the war being fought in the Golden Triangle, but the United States allied itself with some of the most notorious drug smugglers in the area. These were a group called the Hmong. Now the Hmong are kind of excellent. They were really the Hmong are kind of interesting. If you've ever seen the movie Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood, where he's in Detroit and he befriends a family of Asian people, those are Hmongs. After the war, they brought as many as they could. The CIA was pulling all this. They were the ones that allied themselves with the Hmong. They allied themselves with the Hmong, and they also allied themselves with a group called the Ho, H-O. And when they lost the war, they couldn't just leave these people there because the communists would have just annihilated them all. What they did, they brought as many as they could back to the States. The CIA did. And they put them in really strange places. There's some in Los Angeles, which is not that strange, because the weather is very similar to the mountain regions of where they lived in Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. But they also put them in Minneapolis, and they put them in Detroit for some reason. And it's cold up there, and of course they weren't used to that kind of weather. You can, if you type Hmong and you can see what they look like. They're kind of interesting people. Anyway, the Hmong. The Hmong were excellent allies against the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong as they moved freely throughout Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. They fought the communist soldiers who encroached in their area, and they're vicious fighters. They'll smile and slit your throat at the same time. You can't tell, well, anyway, let's not go into that. But they were really, really amazing fighters. And, of course, the CIA really liked that aspect because these guys took no quarter and gave no quarter. They just killed everybody that kind of messed with them. Except us. We were their friends, so they were pretty nice to us. Cocaine doesn't grow just anywhere. Cocaine grows mainly in the humid mountain valleys of Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. Cocaine has been at the forefront of the political problems in Colombia for over half a century. Drug cartels operate with impunity throughout the country and control many of the decisions being made locally and nationally. Worldwide, 25 million people have died from AIDS, and another 40 million have been infected with HIV. 25 million, that's the number of people in Texas plus Montana, and 40 million, that's California plus Oregon, all the people living there. In the United States, around 900,000, that's the population of Montana. People have been infected with HIV, while 500,000, the population of Seattle, have died of AIDS. In the United States, about 500,000 people have died from AIDS. When the AIDS epidemic first hit in between 1982 and 1983, it was mostly caused by unsafe sex between homosexual males. But in time, it spread into the intravenous drug-injecting population, and now it is more likely to be contracted by sharing contaminated needles than any other cause. When it first hit, it was only in the gay population, the gay male population, and it was mostly in the cities. So we saw it on the East Coast. See, I was working in medicine at this time. I was in Omaha, and Omaha had more beds than they had people. So we were getting a lot of individuals from out of state. So New Jersey wanted to send us some of their HIV patients. At the time, they had no clue what we were in denial. In 82 and 83, Reagan was president, and the conservatives had taken over the government. And they didn't want to admit that this was a problem. They didn't want to admit that we had homosexuals in the United States. So they were all in denial. So we didn't do anything about AIDS until the middle of the 1980s. As ugly and stupid as that seems, hiding your head in the sand just doesn't work. As we saw with Trump and the COVID-19. He kept saying everything's going to be fine, it's going to go away, it's just like the flu, it's going to go away when it gets warm, and all that other stupid stuff. And he was really wrong, and so was Reagan. So Reagan didn't do anything about this stuff. But we had all these patients, and we needed to do something with them. We knew they were going to die because we had no way of treating them at the time. So they were transporting them, and we didn't like to transport them because we didn't know what was contagious and what wasn't contagious. So it was tough. It was a really tough time when we didn't know what to do. This was in the early 80s until finally the French, who did not hide their heads in the sand, discovered that it was caused by a virus, and it was infecting the blood. It was infecting your blood supply. So at that point we started, Reagan got shamed into doing something about the AIDS epidemic. And the French had already figured it out. So we took their research and we did our own research and started treating it. We found things that treated it. So there you go. Oh man, that was a strange time. Before the AIDS epidemic, medical personnel never wore gloves, only in surgery. That was the only time that you wore them. They were too expensive for everybody to wear gloves all the time. Now you have to put on gloves. Everybody puts on gloves constantly for one thing or another. But I used to draw blood without wearing gloves. I can remember when we first had to draw blood with wearing gloves. It was different. because, you know, and at that time they had the latex gloves weren't nearly as nice as they are today. So they were a lot thicker, and it was difficult to figure out where the vein was. Yeah, it got interesting. A lot of people quit the phlebotomy, because they just couldn't do it. They couldn't handle it. A lot of people had allergies to the latex. The latex was real strong. Anyway, it was a real interesting time. Hepatitis C is the liver infection that infects 4 million, that's the population of Los Angeles, 4 million Americans. About 85 to 90% of all intravenous drug users are infected with HCV, mostly from sharing needles, dummies. And of course, now we have a treatment for hepatitis C. So not everybody dies with or from hepatitis C. Ever since the Roaring '20s, people have been mixing the coolest of music with psychoactive drugs. In the '20s, it was jazz mixed with cocaine and bootleg liquor. The women were called flappers, and the men were referred to as jazzbos. And here's a flapper, and this is a jazzbo. Actually, she's not a very good flapper because they wore flat dresses. Tried to bind their breasts. It was a really strange era. But that guy looks like a pretty good jazzbo. In the 1950s, the music was the blues. The psychoactive drugs were heroin and whiskey. The men and the women were either called beats or beatniks, and there's a whole bunch of beats sitting around playing music. Yeah, anyway. In the 1960s and 1970s, the music became hard rock. The psychoactive drugs fueled the music were LSD, speed, marijuana, and wine. And there were all kinds of strange wines out there. Wine coolers, Boone's Farm. There was just a lot of really strange things. And everybody was drinking this really bad wine. I've never been a drinker, so I didn't have to try to partake in any of that yucky stuff. The people were hippies and the women were chicks. So we've got jazzbos and flappers. We've got beats and beatniks. We've got hippies and chicks. Let's see where we go from here. As we drifted into the new millennium, the music became techno or electronic trance music. The psychoactive drugs that fueled the craze were MDMA, marijuana, nitrous oxide, ketamine, GHB, and beer. The participants were referred to as ravers. Marijuana continues to create controversy. I've got a lot of pictures of Amy Winehouse, so I apologize. There she is smoking a joint. Legalized in many states for medicinal purposes. I know she died. She died young, and it was a tragedy. But we seem to have photographic evidence of all the things, the problems that she tended to have. Legalized in many states for medicinal purposes, people are required to have a prescription for its use. Marijuana continues to be the most widely used illegal drug throughout much of the world, including the United States, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and South Africa. The destructive effects of tobacco have prompted many countries to try to curb its use. Cuba banned smoking in public places. Ireland has banned smoking in pubs. In many states in the United States, smoking is banned in any public area. This includes Iowa, Illinois, Arizona, and Montana. Yeah, I know. Look what he's done. Shoot him. As late as 1966, almost half the population smoked regularly, about 42.6%. If you went into somebody's house, they always had a big ashtray right in the middle of the coffee table, so that if you wanted to smoke, you could smoke. Everybody had ashtrays. Yeah. By 2005, the percentage of regular smokers in the United States had declined to less than 1/4 of the adult population, 22.5%. This decline had much to do with the discovery that cigarettes contain many carcinogens that cause disturbing medical problems. 1,178 people die every day from the effects of smoking. A study in England showed that smoking can reduce life expectancy by 10 years. This is Ronald Reagan, starring in Hong Kong. Okay, there he is. There's our ex-president, former president, Ronald Reagan. He's been dead for what, 20 years? Pushing cigarettes, Chesterfields. All right. Despite the reduction of revenue for tobacco companies in the United States, they have been able to keep profits up by developing foreign markets in the third world. In the United States, tobacco manufacturers have tried to sustain their market by targeting females, minorities, and younger smokers. In 1998, tobacco companies agreed to pay $246 billion because they had been lying to everybody and the research was flawed. And this they had to pay for 25 years. So this is the last year. They have to, all this, they forked out $246 billion. Now, how in the world can you do that? The answer is because their profits are so amazingly high. Right now, I think a pack of cigarettes costs, what, $7? Well, a lot of that goes to the manufacturer, the cigarette manufacturer. By golly, they can afford $246 billion. And look what they did. Killed all those people off. I can remember when I was a kid, I used to look at the obituaries, and people were dying of lung cancer in their 40s and 50s. That's one of the reasons why the life expectancy when I was born in 1949 was only 59. I'm 73 right now. I'll be 74 in October. A couple months. Worldwide, 33 million people use amphetamines or similar stimulant substances. In the United States, 16 million meth labs were raided in 2004. However, meth labs have been partially controlled by controlling the precursor chemicals ephedrine and pseudoephedrine found in common cold remedies. And here's where all the meth labs are. There's the #1 place. I'm going there in 2 days. I have to go to Indiana on Tuesday. So I'll be conducting my office hours from the airport in Indiana. I'm trying to help a former student of mine get settled in his new job. There you go. This is in 2014. Oh my God, it's my home state. I hope none of my relatives, well, actually, one of my relatives is a pusher. My great niece. Treatment for amphetamine usage has skyrocketed in the past decade. In 1993, only 21,000 people sought treatment for amphetamine addiction. This figure had increased to 151,000 by 2004. Other stimulants also make an impact on our lives. The use of caffeine in recent years has increased markedly. Coffee kiosks have sprung up in tiny towns, and sales of caffeinated soft drinks and energy drinks have exploded. Full Throttle, Monster, Rockstar, Red Bull. 18% of teens, 4,300,000, abused Vicodin in the form of hydrocodone in 2004. Hydrocodone is the most widely used and abused prescription opiate. 10%, 2,300,000 teens, abuse the opiate Percodan in the form of OxyContin, the time-released version of oxycodone. Drugs make you sexy. There you go. You can't argue with those faces. Alcohol directly kills 75,000 people in the United States every year. Alcohol directly kills 1.8 million people worldwide every year. 17.6 million Americans have an alcohol abuse disorder. That is 8.5% of the adult population. Alcoholics make up 10 to 15% of people in hospitals. 10 to 20% of people in nursing homes are alcoholics. When MRIs were done on gamblers, the portions of the brain that were activated by winning and losing were the same areas that were activated by cocaine. Statistics show that 2.5 million Americans are classified as pathological gamblers. 3 million Americans are classified as problem gamblers. 15 million Americans are at risk for problem gambling. One study in Minnesota in 2004 found that 1% of the gamblers accounted for 50% of the wagers. In the same year, among the riverboats of Illinois, 10% of the gamblers accounted for 80% of the revenues. While gambling may be the most economically devastating behavioral addiction, there are others that are equally personally devastating. Compulsive overeating, anorexia, bulimia, internet addiction, sexual addiction, excessive TV addiction, compulsive shopping, pornography addiction. And there you go. That is the end of the chapter. Now, one of the things I want to look up, this is just for curiosity's sake, the movie Hong Kong that Ronald Reagan was in. Movie Hong Kong. Let's see when it was. See when he was pushing tobacco. It's Chesterfield's. Wait a minute. I can do this. Ronald Reagan. We can do this. There it is. 1952. Adventure film directed by Louis R. Foster and written by Winston Miller. There you go. Ronald Reagan. I got to see that movie. There he is. Uh-oh. She's about to lose her shirt. Rhonda Fleming. Okay. Just thought I would look that up. Anyway, so next week I'll talk about something. I think maybe I'll talk about it, or maybe not. Anyway, whenever we do chapter 2, I'll talk to you again.